Hi guys, I'm Mike.
And I'm Ash.
And this is F1 Fanatics. So, like we mentioned on Thursday, we are launching our rivalry series and we are looking at one of the classic rivalries in F1. So classic, it got his own movie in the form of Rush. And if you have Chris Hemsworth playing with you, you know you've made it, haven't you?
Yeah, I think so.
Right, so if you haven't guessed by that point, we are doing, of course, Lauda versus Hunt. And you can guess who's doing Lauda and who's doing
Hunt.
And so guys, just like we usually do in this, we will give a stat breakdown for you guys. We will then talk into some, we'll look at the 1976 season, which was their main title rivalry against each other. Some discussion points further around there before giving our conclusions of who we think is better, Lauda or Hunt. But guys, if you're new around here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click that bell notification, and you can keep up to date with all our latest content and see more videos like this. But Ash, shall we start?
Yeah. Okay, so one thing I will say is before we go into anything, the stats that we're using for this one are based on 1973 to 1979. And the reason we're doing that is because we're comparing the time that they were both in Formula 1. So if you start looking at Niki Lauda's stats and you're saying, well, they're not right, they are for the time we're doing. Yes, there was an extra world championship and a lot more race wins following the period that we're looking at, but we wanted to try and get a direct comparison between the two, so we have limited the stats to that time constraint.
And also, if you look at the points and are surprised why the points totals are quite low, it is because the FIA World Championship points were awarded differently back then, so it is a lower total than what we're expected to the high totals we see in modern day F1. But shall we start with James Hunt's stats, Ash?
Yes, so...
Right, we should slide over, shouldn't we?
Step over first.
There we go, stat files up.
Stats will appear. And James Hunt won one world title in 1976, which is the one we're going to discuss later on in the video. He had 10 race wins in Formula 1, 23 podiums. He managed to attain 179 points. As Mike said, points were awarded differently, so it's a reasonable total, just not as high as some of the totals we see nowadays. He had 14 pole positions and achieved 8 fastest laps.
And then guys, moving on to Niki Lauda, and in this period he secured 2 world championships to James Hunt's 1, and many would argue that maybe he would have had a third in that James Hunt era if we hadn't got the Nürburgring crash, but we'll talk more about that in the 1976 part of the video. He also has 17 race wins to his name in this period. He has 39 podiums along with 292.5 points and 24 pole positions and also 14 fastest laps. So in every stat he beats James Hunt in this period. Now we probably look at their head-to-head, and the best way to look at their head-to-head, guys, is to look at that 1976 season, but Niki Lauda leads. So we are back in the middle, so we can go, oh, got Niki down there and we've got James Hunt over there. Perfectly, we're alright at this editing. We just make up as we go along. Anyway, so 1976, the big rivalry year between these two, and obviously they had the big Hollywood drama of that crash with Niki Lauda that many thought he would lose his life in, but not only did he survive, he actually came back. He only missed 4 race weekends and was able to come back, and actually in the last race he competed in secured a podium, which is an absolutely amazing achievement. So Niki Lauda in this period, in this season, got 5 race wins.
That was compared to the 6 race wins for James Hunt. I was about to jump in with James Hunt, though, for the season had 5 retirements and a disqualification.
Yeah, and what was that disqualification for, Ash?
So the disqualification was for changing to a spare car after an accident at the British Grand Prix, but we'll discuss it a little bit later on for the reasons why that disqualification actually took place.
And Lauda only had 3 retirements, and obviously the most major one is that crash at the Nürburgring when he was, if you've seen the film and obviously know about it from there, obviously we're too young to have lived through it, but from what we've read in there, he was reluctant to race on that day because it was terrible conditions at the Nürburgring, and he actually, then had a horrifying crash, burns that obviously lasted him throughout his whole life, but it is an absolute miracle and dedication to the character of Lauda that he was able to come back from that in the same season and still be competitive at the top.
And in the season, James Hunt managed to achieve 8 podiums there, so a good return for him.
And Niki Lauda was actually able to beat him in this stat, securing 9 podiums, and that is with missing 2 races and withdrawing from the last race of the season in Japan because he thought the conditions were too dangerous to drive in.
So that is the stats of the season. Now what we're going to do is we've picked out a couple of the more controversial points from the season, shall we say?
Certainly shall.
And this will be us explaining them and just giving our view on them. So, shall I start?
I reckon you should, Dash.
So the first flashpoint of the season was James Hunt's disqualification from the Spanish Grand Prix. Now, for those of you that don't know, McLaren was disqualified for being too wide. Now, it was too wide by the tiniest of margins, and it was actually overturned on appeal later in the season, so James Hunt was awarded the race win that he had earned over that weekend.
The next flashpoint in this season was at Silverstone, and after an incident going into turn 1, both James Hunt and Lauda's teammate Clay Regazzoni went back through a slip road that they weren't allowed to, and both got into the spare cars. They challenged Hunt's finish, but the crazy thing about this is they were so desperate to get Niki Lauda the advantage in points that they were willing to sacrifice his teammate Clay Regazzoni, because it meant with James Hunt being disqualified, it also meant that Lauda's teammate Clay Regazzoni also got disqualified.
And then the next big point for the season was the horror crash in Germany for Lauda. Now, you can look at this, and I think we're all in agreement when we say this was the real turning point within the championship battle itself. So it was one of those where it was a debatable one as to whether the race should have gone ahead. Now, a lot of it is dramatised and said that Lauda was the one that was pushing for the race not to go ahead, but he wasn't the only one that was saying that the conditions were too dangerous, and the main reason was because of the length of the track. Now, it meant that there were patches of the track that were wet and patches that were dry, and it just meant that it was so interchangeable that you never really knew whether you were going to have the grip or not. And one thing we can all agree on is the crash itself was horrific, and it is a miracle that Niki Lauda survived, let alone got back into a race car following it.
And to compound that as well, within the race, you also had James Hunt go on and secure the race victory in that race. So not only had Lauda almost lost his life in terms of the championship battle, obviously in terms of the bigger scale of things, irrelevant on the day, but James Hunt was able to gain a point advantage, and as we saw at the end of the season, that proved to be vital. And then guys, the next point is 2 race weekends on, and after that horrifying crash, he was back in a car. And he wasn't just back in a car driving down the shops and helping carry his wife around. No, He was competing in a World Championship for Formula 1, and he finished 4th in that race, which is a miraculous achievement that it was almost like business as usual. I suppose the only business as usual was that Nicky wasn't on the podium, but it was amazing that he got back in the car so quickly after the accident.
It was, and also another big one to put out there, Ferrari at Monza. Yeah, definitely one you'd want to be back in, wouldn't you?
It certainly would be. If you're a Ferrari driver, you never want to miss Monza.
So that led us to Japan and the final race of the season, and it was a title decider. It was between Lauda and Hunt. They were as close as you could get, really, and well, it was a race that brought back memories for a number of drivers, including Lauda himself, because the weather was awful, and there was actually a drivers' meeting held before the race to decide whether or not it should go ahead because it was deemed too dangerous. Now, what was in the media as accurate as it could be? Maybe not, but there was a lot of drivers supposedly coming out and saying the only reason Lauda didn't want the race to go ahead was because it would have meant that he won the championship. I don't actually believe that. Yes, that may have been something that came into his head, but considering what had happened in Germany, I think that would have been the main thing he was thinking about on that one.
You can forgive him for being concerned about the situation.
So, the race did go ahead, and Lauda, understandably, withdrew from the race. And the one thing I will put out there that shows the man that Niki Lauda was, when he withdrew, his engineers asked him if he wanted them to say that there was an issue with the car, and he turned around and said no. Tell them the truth and tell them the reason why he was withdrawing, which just shows the character he had. And with Niki Lauda not going to be scoring any points, James Hunt knew he needed to finish 3rd to secure the title, and that was mainly because he could have finished on the same points as Niki Lauda because he had more race wins. And as history tells us, he did achieve that, and with it won his one and only Drivers' World Championship in Formula 1.
And yeah, it was a fantastic season between them, and it was a fantastic rivalry. And it's not a rivalry like a Senna and Prost where there was a strong dislike between them. These guys actually did get on, and there was a natural respect between them. Obviously friction throughout the season, as two Alpha drivers you'd expect, but there was a level of respect that they go. So now guys, what we move on to is the pros and cons of each individual driver and how that kind of compares against each other. So the pros of Niki Lauda was he lived and breathed F1. His technical knowledge was probably the most kind of accomplished and superior on the grid. The way that he could set up his car, the way that he knew the car inside out was so much of an advantage and so far ahead of his competitors that it obviously gave him a massive advantage in races and gave him the advantage to go on and win races and win championships. That can't be a criticism that he had that over his competitors, it's just that he took the interest in it and he understood it. But then his cons to someone like a James Hunt was he was a very cautious driver. He wasn't a driver that liked to take risks. He liked to play the percentages, and he liked to know that he would come out odds on top. He wasn't prepared to put himself in a situation that might endanger his race or endanger himself. So yeah, that was his pros and cons of Niki Lauda. And what are the pros and cons of James Hunt, Ashley?
Well, the pro for James Hunt is the fact that he was a naturally gifted driver and had that outright pace and was willing to take those risks. Yes, at times to the detriment of his result, but was willing to go for gaps when they appeared, which led to him actually securing race wins and better results for the team. The biggest con towards James Hunt was the fact that he liked the party lifestyle and culture that came with being a celebrity almost, because at this stage F1 wasn't the same level as it is now in terms of the celebrity aspect of it, but being a British driver, he got a lot of attention from the media, and he played up to that a lot and enjoyed the aspects that he was able to get from that. So I would definitely say that that playboy culture almost definitely affected his career, and ultimately I would say his life as well.
Yeah, entirely. And guys, I think now we kind of probably round up our kind of conclusions and thoughts. And for me, it has to be Niki Lauda as who was the better driver between the two. Yes, James Hunt, he was naturally gifted. He did have that raw talent, but the professionalism of Niki Lauda has to be admired. The way that he lived and breathed the sport, and his technical knowledge was he was ahead of his generation. That was something that you'd come to expect from the later generations of F1 drivers. So yeah, it was absolutely his amazing knowledge, and also the psychological and mental willpower. Like we said, he did win a third world championship in the 80s, but the two world championships he won in this period were incredible, especially one was after that fateful crash at the Nürburgring. To get back in an F1 car after that and to still be the driver you were and be successful, it's incredible, it's absolutely admirable, and Niki Lauda is an absolute legend of Formula 1.
And I'm going to be honest, I have to agree. When you look at the stats and driving styles, Niki Lauda was the better of the two drivers. The one thing I would say is I do feel that James Hunt is able to match the ability of Lauda. I just think the whole culture that he was part of, and it was the parts of his life away from F1 that affected his career. So yes, he had that ability, I just don't think his full potential was actually met. And the one thing I would say is there was almost an aspect of jealousy between the two. I feel James Hunt was jealous of the professionalism that Niki Lauda had, but then again I think Lauda also had that jealousy of the
ease in way,
the ego, the popularity, and just the relaxed side of James Hunt. So it was one where they were chalk and cheese, but ultimately they were cut from the same cloth.
Yeah, and I think this rivalry is one of those rivalries it's always talked about. It is a great F1 rivalry between two drivers. I think it was good at the time, but I think through like a fine wine, it is aged well, and it's become, because of the Hollywood style story of obviously Niki Lauda having the crash and coming back to it, and James Hunt only winning this season by 1 point, and Lauda almost conceding in that last race the title. It is aged really well and become revered, obviously having its Hollywood movie Rush, which is a fantastic depiction of the rivalry between the two. But I think they were both fantastic guys in F1, and yeah, the sport is better for having Niki Lauda and James Hunt compete in it.
Definitely, I'd agree on that.
Anything more from you, Ash?
No, I think we've covered everything.
Well guys, there you have it. We think that Niki Lauda is the better driver, so he wins this classic F1 rivalry. So guys, if you agree with us, let us know what you thought. Do you think we kind of summed up the points well? If you disagree and think James Hunt was the better driver, also let us know. We love having a chat with you guys in the comments. We love talking F1, and we don't need any excuses to do that. So give us a thumbs up if you like this video, and Ash,
make sure to press the subscribe button so that our videos are going into your YouTube inbox, and also make sure to press the bell icon, because then you'll get a notification and you'll be able to see more of these F1 driver rivalries.
So guys, hope you enjoyed that. There's only one thing left to do. You F1 fans, keep racing.